Hey there, Santi here. Today we're gonna be talking with Ruben Chavez. Who's Ruben? I'm glad you asked. He is a writer and podcast host who's deeply interested in the big questions of life, particularly on how to live well. Since 2014, his Instagram page, Think or Prosper, has gained over 2 million followers and he's currently working on a book. Quick note, for those of you that are listening to the podcast audio version of this, just know that there's a video version here on YouTube where you can also leave your comments. And for those of you that I'm pointing at on YouTube, just know there's a podcast version that you can also listen to. Respective links to that in the description as show notes. And with that said, I hope you enjoy the interview. All right, hey, what's up? So here we have Ruben Chavez, the man himself. And Ruben, go ahead, just introduce yourself for anyone that doesn't know you. And yeah, just go ahead.
Oh man, well I'm Ruben. I don't know what I would call myself. Maybe a person development philosopher, maybe a coach. You know, hard to describe, but
Yeah.
I'm out there doing my thing. So I'm glad to be here, though, man.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's great having you. And Ruben is super humble because he has a huge podcast with tons of listeners. And how many followers you have? Like a lot, man. Like it's crazy on Instagram. That's your biggest platform,
Yeah,
right?
that's kind of where I started, Instagram, and I don't really. I think it's over 2 million, but quite honestly, I stopped paying attention to that a long time ago, just because the numbers games get you depressed, and
Yeah.
also it kind of dehumanizes the whole social media game, and for me it just wasn't productive to focus on. But I'd much rather have a tighter group of people that were like paying super close attention than a whole bunch of people who kind of are lukewarm. But yeah, it's over a couple million followers, so I'm very grateful for everybody who finds any value in anything I write or say.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's crazy because I don't know when I discovered your podcast, but that was like right for me when I started getting into stoicism, and it was super valuable, man. Like I'll tell you a bit of a story later and how it connects certain things with what I'm doing now. But yeah, no. First, I just want to share with the audience like a bit of what is your podcast about for those that are not familiar. What are you doing there, and how did it even started? You know, stuff like that.
Well, I wanted to. I began my online kind of, I guess you could say, content creating career at around 2014, when I was posting stuff on Instagram, and it was just stuff for myself, quotes that I wanted to remember, insights that I wanted to kind of internalize. And it was a really hard time in my life, and I was like, I need to be reminded of these things that have helped me in the past. And so started doing that, and after a while, people started really resonating with some of the things that I was posting. But I wanted to kind of expand. After a couple of years, I wanted to expand on some of the ideas and some of the concepts and go a little deeper. And it was also around the time when I was just kind of just trying to develop my own philosophy and my own kind of framework for how to look at the world. And I thought that doing that in real time with guests, kind of talking out loud and working through my own ideas would be a good platform for that. And so yeah, that's pretty much why I started the podcast. I really just wanted to get in touch with what it is that I thought, and work out in real time my ideas. And so that's what it became. I realized that that was a skill. That's actually a skill. I realized it's not something that, like, I'm not a super talkative person in my personal life. I don't, I'm not like out there, like if you just met me and you didn't know who I was online, you would not think I was, posting motivational things or inspirational things or thought or kind of insights or philosophical insights or anything like that. You'd be like, oh, this guy kind of, keeps to himself. He's pretty quiet. And I don't really tell people how to live, or even offer them suggestions unless they ask me. So talking to people in real time took a little bit to get used to. I was very nervous initially, and so it wasn't initially, at least, it wasn't the place where I initially thought that I was, like, how it was going to be, where I was going to be able to work out my thoughts in real time and like come to these conclusions with people. It was more just me trying to be an interviewer and me trying to like
Yeah.
hold the conversation together. I mean, I tried very hard not to make it like an interview, because I thought that wasn't the right way to look at it. But I did try to just make a conversation and happen. And so anyway, once I built that skill, it started to become a little bit more natural, and I started to be a little bit more organic in my thinking, and it was more along the lines of what I had envisioned originally. So, but that's kind of in a nutshell what led me to make the podcast.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's crazy because for you, did it like the whole journey into philosophy and that kind of stuff? Like, did that get started because of something in particular? Like, do you remember like one instance, or was it more circumstantial from your life? You know, how did it all
Well,
started?
I think fatherhood really instigated the big a big era in my life of philosophical inquiry, because like when I began, I started reading personal development books like when I was 18 years old. I got contacted by a network marketer, and I was in that world for a while, and it was very cool. It was very enriching for me. I was really young, and I just all these people who were doing business, and they were like cheering each other on, and they were encouraging me to read these motivational books and inspirational books and business books. Not just inspiration, but tactical books. So it was a new world for me, and I was like just taken aback. And that was actually my second exposure to the personal development world. My first exposure was when I was in junior year of high school. I took a psychology class, and in that psychology class, my teacher, Mr. Corner, Kevin Corner, still to this day, I think about him almost once a month. And he, for a whole semester, he taught the books, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That was the book that he taught. And I had never heard of this. I had never heard of that book. I never knew about personal development. I was 16, 17 years old, and I was blown away. Like he was a fantastic speaker. Also, Kevin Corner. He was just a great teacher. He's won awards. He's phenomenal. And the worst kids, the kids who never paid attention in class and who were flunking every other class would pay attention in his class, and it was so cool. And I was just enraptured by the principles and the idea that there was like a framework that you could apply to your life, that you could make improvements, and this whole thing, so that was my first exposure, and then that planted the seed. And then fast forward a couple years later, when I entered the kind of network marketing world, I was already primed. I was ready to go, and so for years I kind of read personal development books on and off. You know what I mean? Like I eventually quit the network marketing that I was doing, but it was a good experience, and maybe drift away from books. But then I at times in my life I would rediscover some of these books that had really resonated with me and helped me to overcome challenges or be a better communicator or whatever, and then I think the more, so that was kind of that was my roots in terms of my intellectual pursuits. But I kind of always sensed that there was something there was more to it. There was something else that I was not really picking up on, and I always tried to connect the dots, but I didn't have the mental tools to do that. I didn't have the mental models. I didn't have the education, frankly. And so one of the big I would say milestone events in my intellectual life, at least, was the 2016 presidential election in the United States. Because what happened then, I had already started Think Grow Prosper in 2014, and just kind of posting some of these quotes that I was revisiting and for myself. And I'd had some success, and 2016 hit, and in the US at least, everything was crazy polarized, and it was confusing to me, because I started to think, like, I had friends on both sides of friends and family on both sides of the political aisle, and the political spectrum. And I was trying to understand why people were disagreeing so much. And in my pursuit of trying to understand why people were disagreeing so much, I realized that a lot of that has to do with, human nature. And that intersects quite squarely with personal development. And politics and personal development are really just the same thing at different scales. I think, when you're developing yourself, like as an individual, you have different parts of yourself that you need to integrate. And then, and then when you're developing a society, like you have different parts that you need to integrate that are opposing, that you need to cooperate so you can create a peaceful society, you know? And so I think that that was kind of a rabbit hole for me. That kind of sent me down a path of like trying to understand politics, but also how personal development and my knowledge structure fit into like politics. And then I realized like, well, politics is basically like an extension of the philosophical branch of ethics. And because it's ethics is how do you live in the world and what's the right action, you know? And so then I realized, well, yeah, if in order to make sense of politics, you have to know what, you know, what people have said, what the brightest thinkers the world has produced, what they have said about and what they have thought about what constitutes right action. That's at least a good place to start, I figured, you know. And so when I realized that, I kind of, you know, I did my due diligence, you know. I did my best to I took a lot of courses and lectures that covered a broad the kind of the story of philosophy, like the history of philosophy. I didn't like study in depth individual thinkers, partly because like I didn't have time. Like I'm like I have a family, you know what I mean? Like I still have a business to run. So I wanted to get the most bang for my buck. And what I did was basically say to myself, okay, I want to figure out I want to get acquainted with the landscape of thought, the landscape of human thought in regards to like ethics and kind of philosophical inquiry. What have humans thought since we've been recording ourselves thinking? That was kind of my idea, because I didn't know, like I didn't realize, like I wasn't paying attention to what I think of as the great conversation. And I've heard this different modern philosophers talk about it like this way. There's been a great conversation going on for millennia, really, since the Greeks and even before then, you know. And the conversation is about how to live in the world. What is the world? What is reality? How do we structure society? Like, these are big questions that people have been talking about for ages. And when you realize that, I finally concluded, when you realize that, and then when you start listening to these conversations and kind of going deep into these thinkers who have contributed to human thought, then you enter the conversation and you're part of that conversation, you know. Right. And then and especially when you start writing about it and then sharing your thoughts, you know. But you still be part of the conversation if you at least understand the history of thought, and that's important, not because you should just know what people think, although that's interesting, but it's because there's no new issues. Like, everything we're dealing with in society right now, this is another kind of insight that I kind of had, epiphany that I had, I suppose, that may be obvious to the seasoned philosopher, but it wasn't to me. But it's that every issue that we are dealing with, every problem that we have, every contentious thing that we talk about as a society, and even, you know, at different scales as a society, but also in our families and also on the individual level, it has all been dealt with before in different ways. It's just they're different manifestations of the same problems that we've been dealing with for ages. So there's no new problems, and looking at philosophy and studying philosophy will help you realize that and help you grapple with the different components and make sense of the different components of the problem, so you can kind of come to your own conclusions. That's how I see it.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's incredible. Like, I like this thing that you say about there's no new problems, right? Like, and that's really what got me personally into ancient philosophy, as particularly Stoicism. For me, was very interesting to see these people that lived thousands of years ago, with life being so different, but it's still kind of dealing with the same core principles that affect us as humans, right? And that just transcends time. Like, there seems to be something fundamental about just being a human and learning how to deal with your own emotions and your own problems and so forth. And you also talked about this idea of how the political meets the philosophical, or rather the individual, right? And I like that a lot, because for a long time for me, I was really distant from politics, not wanting to get involved in that. And someone that kind of helped me understand that a bit better, and you're probably a big fan of him, but Jordan Peterson,
Yes.
like he's been a huge influence in my life, especially recently. I mean, I just go in waves of Jordan Peterson, and right now I've just spent most of my days listening to him, and it's just incredible, and I think you really pointed out something that he says all the time, which is kind of like clean up your room, like solve yourself before you try to solve others.
Yeah, well, I was trying to do that. I was trying to sort out my thoughts. I was trying to
Yeah.
understand things from kind of a first principles perspective. Um, yeah, I guess Jordan Peterson helped me to understand the the how I guess one of the main things he helped me understand, at least in the political sphere,
Mhm.
was how and why a diversity of perspectives and political temperaments are useful, and not just useful but necessary. I didn't understand that. He also helped me understand the distinction between different political perspectives through the lens of personality, because that for me was very, very useful. Like I didn't connect. Like I intuited, it. I suppose on some level, but I didn't understand how. I mean, he's a personality psychologist. That's actually
Right.
his field, and so like he's a psychometrician, I think, and so he looks at the data of different personality traits and what they and the implications that has in different spheres. And so obviously, like he does, he's forayed into many different fields since then, but that's his original training, I think. And so um I thought that was very useful, like connecting the idea that like people have, like, first of all, learning about the big five framework, for example, like
Right.
the personality traits that kind of constitute every individual in different degrees. I guess it's the big five, and he introduced me to that in a very real way. That was so useful for me, because then I realized, okay, so higher people who are very high in openness, for example,
Right.
like to have new experiences. They like to break things apart, and to see how they work. They like to uh, they have a higher tolerance for uncertainty, and for things that are different. They have a higher tolerance for the unknown, that kind of a thing. Um, People who are, yeah, and so though that personality trait is very, very highly correlates to people who identify as liberals,
Right.
and in the West, that in America in
Yeah.
particular, we call them
Yeah.
liberals,
Yeah. Hmm.
Democrats, um, and so that's really interesting. And then on the flip side, you have people who are more interested in order and conscientiousness, and the trait there is conscientiousness.
Yeah.
That's another big five trait. It's conscientiousness, and that kind of has these subcategories, but essentially, you're more interested in order. You're more interested in kind of hierarchy, and making sure things go a certain way, and you have less
Right.
tolerance for unknown things. Um, there's a lot of different, I'm glossing over a lot of detail here,
Yeah.
but there's
Yeah.
a lot of different traits that different sub traits that make up these kind of broad categories of traits.
Hmm.
But the idea for me was like, okay, so and then I realized through people like Jonathan Haidt, for example, because Jonathan Haidt, I would say, is probably my top intellectual hero. He
Really.
helped me understand. He helped me put this all together in a more cohesive kind of. He helped me tie these traits to more like morality in a more explicit way. But
Yeah.
I would say that for me that was really useful, because then I realized, okay, well, I learned that personality is at least 50% biological. Like there's a huge
Yeah.
biological component to
Definitely.
personality. So that's very interesting, because that throws a wrench in the whole political thing. Because then we're
Right.
not just talking about arbitrary ideas that people
Yeah.
have. We're talking about how people are. We're talking about how people
Right.
are on a very
In their
deep
core,
level.
right? Yeah.
These
Yeah.
aren't just ideological differences, although there's a part of that. These are
Right. There's definitely
temperamental
part.
differences.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, okay, what do we do about that? And why do we have these temperamental differences? And then that led me to evolutionary psychology, which Jonathan Haidt has helped me understand more. Also, it's like, well, maybe it's the case that these different temperaments, these different personality traits,
Mm-hmm.
evolved throughout our over the course of our evolutionary history in order to help us to deal with different social and environmental problems, challenges that we faced, and so maybe they're useful. This doesn't mean that everybody is automatically right in their opinion. It just means that there is or in their political viewpoint, for example, but
Right.
it does mean that there's a credible case for for most perspectives. An individual could be entirely wrong, but an individual is part of a larger, group, and that
Mm-hmm.
group, let's say, his political leaning, and that group has wisdom in it. Like the right has wisdom in it, the left has wisdom in it. That wisdom becomes distorted in certain ways because there's a corruptive element to everything, and so things get distorted. People have ulterior motives, all that. But I always try to think of like, okay, where is this view coming from? What need is this view trying? Is this seemingly like wacky view trying to meet, for example? Is it a
Yeah. Yeah.
security need? Is it a need for change? There's these fundamental needs that we're all trying to meet because they're part of our personality. And if we can think in those terms, I found that we can have a little bit more moral imagination and compassion for people who maybe think differently than us. So personality was a really big understanding personality and personality differences was a big deal for me. And I would say Jordan Peterson helped me to understand that.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I mean, you brought up kind of like these needs that people have kind of at their core, depending on, like you were saying, there's tons of factors, right? The biology and how your genetics change the way that you perceive the world, right? And how you behave in it. But there's also like, and that really ties with like learning to distinguish between what we do control and what we don't control, which is a topic that I think applies to almost everything. But how do you think this relates to kind of like the individual desire for not just material things, but rather accomplishment and goals? That's definitely something that's been on my mind a lot, and we briefly mentioned it the other day. That is something I wanted to talk to you, because that's something I've struggled a lot with. How do you deal as an individual, as someone that is very thoughtful about how to live your life, regarding desires and goals?
How do I think about them?
Yeah, how do you approach that?
Well, so I guess after I'll just give you just a quick background
Yeah.
on kind of where I'm coming from here before I answer that. But after I discovered some of these thinkers like Jonathan Haidt, like Jordan Peterson, like Yuval Noah Harari, he's a big influence on me too. And many others, but I started to kind of put things together. I like to I think about things in a very big picture way. Like if we had a conversation about like Nietzschean philosophy, I would not be a very good conversationalist, because I think about where he fits into the big picture of philosophy,
Okay.
and where ideas fit into this bigger framework. I'm not like a specialist. I am a generalist when it comes to kind of
Yeah.
thinking philosophy, because I'm trying to make sense of a lot of things at once.
Right. Right. Right.
And so I maybe later on I'll be a specialist and a generalist. But anyway, what I guess to answer your question, I started to kind of develop my own way of looking at things, my own lens, my own framework, like from all these different thinkers who were very big thinkers, who thought about things in a very broad way. Like one of my favorite disciplines is big history. Like have you taken the big history course from David Christian? It's really
No, I
cool, dude.
haven't.
It's like 50 hours of lectures, but it's like the entire universe. It's basically an extended version of Sapiens. Have you read Sapiens?
Yeah, yeah. I
But
mean, well, not in full, but yeah, I'm aware.
okay, so Sapiens is one of my favorite books. And
Really?
that's big history basically. He's taking the history of humanity, and he's kind of turning it into a narrative, turning into a story that you can read in 400 or 500 pages, which is a huge feat for the history of humanity. So anyway, those are the type of thinkers I'm really attracted to. The people who think over long periods of time and who try to make sense of a lot of information. So I started to develop my own way of doing this, and I kind of came up with this framework that of kind of I guess these different dimensions of human experience. They could be different dimensions. They could be construed as values. They could be construed as needs. But anyway, there's these kind of sets of needs that always oppose each other. Like we have these different. Jonathan Haidt kind of talks about this in his book, The Righteous Mind. He talks about like we all have different moral intuitions about like what's right, and I just realized that a lot of thinkers haven't placed an emphasis on the idea that a lot of these intuitions, they actually are they're more patterned than we think, in the sense that not only do we have different intuitions about what's right and about what to value, but they also oppose each other. We have conflicting ones. And that's a real issue. Like, for example, with the question of like goal and desire.
And desires.
That kind of manifests as, these opposing views kind of manifest as two different schools of thought when it comes to how to navigate, kind of your life, how to handle desire, I suppose. And one of them is very Western in nature, and the Western approach is like, go after what you want and like have a goal and charge forth and achieve it, regardless of what people say. Like, you're an individual, you can do it, and obviously like that's very powerful. The opposing side, the opposing school of thought there would be like very Eastern in origin, and it's something like, go with the flow of life, like accept what comes. And this is like the Tao Te Ching, the Tao Te Ching isn't telling you to set goals, you know what I mean? Like, it's saying like be like water, go with the flow, and practice acceptance, that's the Buddhist way too, in many ways. And Stoicism has an element of that too. It's like amor fati, this kind of acceptance of what is. And those are a bit at odds with each other, as you can tell. It's like, wait. So along with that is kind of like this idea of gratitude, like be grateful for what you have, and just kind of like be, don't do, be, and that's kind of the split. It's like doing and being, kind of. And it's like which one is right? And the reality is, I think we need both. Like, I think it's obvious when you step back that we need both in some way. Different people have articulated this in different ways. I think Jim Rohn was like, be grateful for what you have while you pursue all that you want, this kind of a thing. But that's uniting these two different schools of thought. So we need to have goals, but we need to have the flexibility to kind of move with the flow of life, and to change our direction, and maybe even change our goal itself, because we don't know what life is going to throw at us, and we need to be equipped to do that. And so I think that's how there's always this balance point between these opposing schools of philosophy, these opposing schools of thought. And I think that's the kind of the balance point there. Like I've in the past, I have like set goals and been very rigid about, I'm going to achieve this goal, and this is the one I'm going to, and this is what I want, and I know this is what I want, and I'm going to get it. And the problem with that is that you're like, at least with me, sometimes what you want changes. And also sometimes there's a better path that leads to somewhere else that you might not have even realized you wanted. And so that's just one issue of many with that. And so that's why there needs to be another strategy. I think of these in some sense as strategies, like different strategies for navigating the complexity of reality. And we need different strategies. We need this, we need this. As soon as you espouse one particular advice, one particular strategy, I've noticed that you can kind of look at it from an opposing side, and the exact opposite could also be appropriate in certain cases. And so I'm always thinking in these terms. I'm always thinking in terms of like, okay, that's good advice, but also what's the opposite of that, and how might that be useful too? And it turns out that's almost always the case that you can come up with an opposing argument, and then you're left with, well, which one do I follow? And the answer is almost always like, well, it's some combination of the two. It's some balance point. Whenever there's two conflicting philosophies and they both kind of make sense in some sense, well, then it's your job to apply, or to like integrate the two, or apply them in different situations as is needed, basically.
Wow, man. Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, the whole thing about the balancing thing, I think that's wisdom, right? Like perhaps wisdom is knowing when to apply what concept, depending on the given situation. Like, that I wanted to share this with you, but there's a creator I follow called Haidt. Sorry if I butchered that. Either way, he tweeted this right before we started, and I was like, wow, that's perfect, because that relates really to the idea of goals and how to approach it, right? And he says the paradox of goals is that if you achieve them, you get bored. If you don't, you're unsatisfied. Therefore, you bounce between being bored and unsatisfied. So what do you do with that,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, this kind of goes back to what I think is one of our fundamental core human needs, or you could think of it as core kind of values that we all have, and that are in opposition to each other. And those are the need for, I call it kind of novelty, which would be like achieving goals and newness, like
Right.
trying to achieve something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And security, which is like
Right.
novelty would be on the path, like
Mm.
on the adventure, and then security would be like the achievement, the actual achievement, and then like,
Yeah.
think of having like, you achieve your goal, and now you're like, let's say financially secure, or you're like you have more status now, and then like, as we know, humans adapt very quickly, and so we have this what was once a very novel achievement now becomes our baseline, our new normal. And so that's always at play, though, dude. If you just think of the political landscape too, you can imagine how those two values are always kind of in tension with each other. It's like this need for the new, this need to update our systems, our lives, our rituals, our habits, our traditions, our customs, our norms. This need to update all that because we need to make it new, but also this need to have some stability, have some security, so that we don't just like devolve into chaos. So
Right.
yeah, that's the whole game right there. It's at least it's
Yeah,
a big part of the game.
Definitely. Like Jordan Peterson talks about how, well, he talks a lot about chaos and order. That's his book.
Yeah.
But particularly the first book, pretty much about like finding the order in chaos. And he talks about this idea of like the psyche of the individual is kind of like always finding that middle point between having, less in his words, kind of like having one foot set on chaos and one foot in order, or rather, like you say, to put it in your words, security versus achievement, right? Like having like one foot in comfort in the things you know, and then having another foot in the unknown. And whenever you can have that, that's kind of like flow or bliss, and that's kind of like an ultimate state of being.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Flow is like the modern version of Wu Wei. I think I'm saying that right. Wu Wei is
Wu Wei.
Wu Wei
Yeah.
is it's a Taoist concept of like kind of being like, it's like no mind, and it's like action without action. It's like effortless action,
non-action.
and and it's this idea that like once you're like, I think once you're, you can think of it of a number of different ways, but like when you're kind of integrating these different elements in a way, and you've practiced that so much, you can do it almost effortlessly. You can do it almost without thinking. And athletes get into that state, and different people who practice their craft a lot get into that state. But I think you can even do that on a more mundane, basic level, every day, if we're always aware of the kind of opposing forces that are at play, you know, in all of our moral decisions, in all of our even personal decisions, you know, because morality is not just like, you know, about sex and like, yeah, you know, killing people. It's like morality is how to act, and that bleeds into virtually every area of our life. So
Right.
yeah.
Man, that's crazy. You know, like I also wanted to ask you about um just the concept of even like truth, because I think that relates a lot to what you were saying previously about like, you know, there's certain sides in the political spectrum, in all types of thinking about how to be a good human in society. And I want to know, well, first, you know, to kind of like transition into this topic, which I think is pretty expansive, but how would you describe truth?
Hmm. I loved I've listened to the conversation on truth that Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris had. Did
Yeah,
you? I
yeah,
mean,
same.
the infamous conversation.
Right.
I've listened to that probably like 10 times, maybe.
Really.
That conversation, yeah, it's just so good. Both of them, because there was a follow up. There was an initial one, and then there was a follow up
Right.
years ago, and it was really insightful. It was really helpful for me, um, because I mean, it's been a while since I've listened to it, but fundamentally, like Sam Harris thinks that there is an objective truth, um, whether we know it or not. And Jordan Peterson is more along the lines of, well, maybe, but it's kind of irrelevant because truth is more pragmatic than that. You know, truth like is what allows us to exist essentially.
Right.
If there's no, if there's, you know, if we're not, if we don't survive, it wasn't true enough essentially. And that's a pragmatist idea. You know, the pragmatist philosophers thought along those same lines. You know, it's like what's true is what's useful. What's true is what's useful essentially. Um, and Again, I think there's a combination of both. Yuval Noah Harari helped me to understand this a bit also, because I think of he kind of helped me understand that there's three kind of levels of reality. There's three kind of
Yeah.
dimensions of truth, I guess you could think about. There's the
Hmm.
objective truth,
Right.
which may exist regardless of what we think. You can think of like radioactivity or something just very
Hmm.
scientific, you know.
Okay.
Um, then there is subjective truth, subjective reality,
Right.
which is, you know, our thoughts and feelings. Um, and those have a very real element to them also. That's a reality. It's a different reality though than neutrons and electrons. You know, your subjective reality is a different reality than neutrons and electrons than an objective reality, but it's still a reality. And then you have intersubjective reality. And
Okay.
intersubjective reality is kind of where the two meet in a sense. It's the truth that we make by interacting with each other, and it's a truth that we create essentially, like money. Like money, you know,
Right.
doesn't have any intrinsic value.
Mm.
It's a piece of paper. The construct of money is just that. It's a construct. It doesn't exist objectively in nature. But we, you know, we're all like, if you come across $1 million, like there's a very real element to that because we have imbued money with meaning. And if everybody stopped believing in money, like it would become meaningless. But because we all believe it intersubjectively, it becomes true. So it's kind of like group level beliefs. Religion is another one of these. Well, at least in Yuval Noah Harari's
Okay.
conception of religion, it's another. You know, he talks about it as myths that we create that maybe have some utility. You know, just like money has
Mm.
some utility in the world. It's not objectively true, and he would say the same thing about religion. Um, so this idea of intersubjective reality or truth, because reality and truth are, I would say, very similar. Intersubjective reality, subjective reality, and objective reality is a very cool way to think about it. I think that there are different manifestations of truth, and that's kind of the broad conception of what I think.
Oh man,
I don't know.
yeah, I actually haven't heard about this idea of intersubjective. It's really interesting. Yeah, it makes sense. Like when you said money, that was like, oh, okay, that's the perfect example, right? Because it is not obvious that money is valuable until we all agree upon it, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, most of the things that we value are and think are extremely important. Most of them are intersubjective truths. Um,
Really?
I think. Yeah, I think. I
Okay.
mean, morality in a sense is is an intersubjective truth, because, or an intersubjective reality.
Right. Right.
Um, I mean, partly because, I mean, it depends on your conception of morality, but like, you know, if you're like, if you look at nature, if you just watch a Discovery Channel, um, like the morality, at least in the way that we conceptualize it, doesn't exist. It's more complicated, and Jordan Peterson lays this out, because obviously our morality had to come from somewhere, and so it has, like, there's biological roots, because you can observe like hierarchies within a wolf
Yeah.
pack. You can observe chimpanzees, doing certain things that we would deem, like, moral, fall into the moral domain. Um,
Lobsters.
Lobsters, right.
Of course.
And so there's an objective reality, but no one would say that lobsters or wolves
Yeah.
are thinking of morality in the same way that we do. And so we've conceptualized it, we've articulated it and organized it in a much more precise manner, through laws and all that.
Right.
But but that's an intersubjective reality there. What we did there is we created laws. Like, there's no laws in nature, you know what I mean? And so apart from the physical
Yeah.
laws,
Yeah. Yeah. The laws
there's
of
not like,
nature.
right. The laws, exactly. The laws of nature are
Right.
the laws of the universe,
Yeah.
but it's not like you can't, there's no like, you can't, like, have sex with, head wolf can't have sex with this wolf. It's like,
Right.
it's,
Right.
it's not like that. And so we make a lot of laws and rules there's value in a lot of that, but again, it's kind of there's a constructionist element to that, and an intersubjective element to that we all have to agree upon is useful. And so there are many more examples of this, but that's kind of how I broadly conceive of the different domains of truth, I guess. And like, I mean, there's a lot to say about this, man. Obviously, like, Sam
Yeah.
Harris
Of
and
course.
Jordan Peterson have had like hours and hours of discussion about this, and they're a million times more intelligent than I am. But that's kind of the basis of how I think about it. I mean, I'm someone who finds a lot of value. Like, truth can be stated in a lot of different ways, I think. Like,
Yeah.
and Peterson talks about this also. Like, you can read a book, and a really good book, and like a classic work of literature, and go, wow, like, there are elements, but maybe it's a fiction book, maybe it's a fictitious book, and but you can go, wow, like, that this is true, like, this is how life works. I read East of Eden
Right.
a couple years ago, and it was just like
Nice.
a fantastic book. And it's sprawling. It's like, it's biblical in nature. It's, I mean, in the terms of how big its scope is, it deals with different elements of human nature, love, loss, everything, but there are elements in there so true in there. But it's a fictional book. So what is that? Like, what is that? And then you look at, like, maybe and then you go move over to the domain of science, and you read, Stephen Hawking's Brief History of Time, and that's not a fiction book. He's talking about physical things in the universe, but that's also true. And so it's like, okay, what do we do with that? One of the things that I think about is that the idea that there are different ways of stating the truth, and different views of the same thing. Different, like if we're all looking at a mountain, right? Like metaphorically, and there's artists, at the base of the mountain, there's scientists, there's musicians, there's philosophers. We're all looking at a mountain. We're all trying to describe this mountain. We're all going to describe it differently. But, and maybe we paint the mountain. Maybe we draw it, Maybe some people draw it. Maybe some people describe it in words. But we're all describing the same thing. We're just doing it from different perspectives. And I always think that's very, very useful. Like I'm someone who I'll listen to like in the same day, I'll listen to like a channeled being, like these kind of people who like say that they can channel like people from other dimensions. I don't know if you've
mediums.
Yeah. Or I'll listen to
crazy.
Someone like that. Like, there's this guy called this entity called Bashar who's channeled to Daryl Anka. Like I'll listen to that.
Right.
I'll read like A Course in Miracles. I'll listen to Marianne Williamson, like these spiritual teachers, that are a little bit more like, considered woo-woo potentially. But in the same day, I will find immense value in reading a paper in a journal or learning about evolutionary biology or whatever. And like I'm very open to different sources of information. I'm not closed off. It's something I value about myself a lot, and something I think is a really good trait is that I'm not closed off to anything. I mean, I guess I'll qualify that. I obviously like I can't be. I'm not open to every single thing. Like
Right.
I think the flat Earth stuff is a little ridiculous. Like everybody has their limits. You know what I mean?
Right.
But what I mean is that, like, I'm not going to dismiss a source just because it's not it doesn't come from a credentialed background, or because it doesn't have a PhD, or because you know what I mean. There are different ways to describe reality. Reality is really complex. I think science has has been obviously extremely powerful and useful for us. We owe much of our comfort to science and the scientific method. But as with anything, like, if it can become destructive if we start to believe that that's the only way of explaining anything in the world. We have to have different ways of knowing things. What's the place of the mystic? Otherwise, what's the place of the philosopher, the artist? You know what I mean? The art isn't science, but there's something there. Like, well, what are they capturing? Why do we care about art? They're capturing something that's meaningful, that's truthful. And so we have to be open to these different channels of truth, these different levels of reality.
Right, man.
And ways of making sense of the world, I would say.
Right. Making sense of our reality and the world we live in, right? You said something about like, this resonated so much, man. You said something about like, how can we say that something that is fiction or that is a story that is technically made up isn't real, Because, well, in 12 Rules for Life, Jordan talks about kind of like a kid imitating his father. Like he enters the room, he takes a seat on the sofa, he grabs a beer or whatever, or he shouts like something or says something. And maybe his father never did those things in that order, but the kid observed his father and he interpreted what he thinks his father is like and made kind of a fiction out of it, right? But why isn't that true? It feels like a true interpretation. So in that sense, fictitious stories, films or books or anything that feels made up is kind of a way to summarize and I don't know, digest a certain reality.
That's right. That's right. It's a summary. And actually,
Yeah.
I've thought that good books and good fiction, good stories are actually um kind of like statistics. They're kind of like
Okay.
data. And the reason is because a good story, a very deep and complex and rich piece of literature, what it does is it extracts the most truthful elements from the human experience, and it
Right.
distills them. It kind of leaves what's not relevant, and it distills the most useful aspects of human nature, the most truthful aspects of human nature and
Yeah.
of reality, and it puts them into a story. Like, you don't read a story and read about like the boring parts of a person's life. It's all relevant to the story. That's why it's in the story. And so when we read that, we're reading a summary, a distillation
Mm-hmm.
of a large data set of let's say human nature, and we're receiving just the essence of it and what's true about it. And so in statistics and like if you look at like a some table or graph, you're not looking at, oh, well, let me go back to the stories, for example. So the story isn't the story of one individual person like that we know. Like, it could be a story of a fictitious person, but it's not the story of one individual. Like uh you know Harry Potter or Hamlet.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like Harry Potter isn't real, but there's elements of him that we can all
What?
relate to.
Yeah.
There's elements of him that we can all, I know, I mean, it hurt me too. Santa Claus too, man.
What?
But
Right.
but there's elements that
Yeah.
we all can relate to, because the J.K. Rowling distilled a whole bunch
Hmm.
of different elements of human nature and packed them into one character. And so
Yeah.
it's kind of like an archetype in that sense, because it's very relatable on a deep level. But the reason why it's connected to statistics, and more like kind of hard data, is because when you look at like statistics, you're not looking at an individual person. You're looking at a whole data set that's distilled. You know what I mean? And so it's not like the story of like one individual, because you can't make sense of the world through the story of only one person, because everyone has different experiences. So what the data does, and the reason why data is useful and statistics are useful, is they calculate and they look at the experience of many different people. I mean, let's just say we're talking about sociological data or whatever. It's like
Yeah.
you look at the experience of many different people, and then we're quantifying that in a way that we can understand through numbers. And it's like it's the distilled essence of what's true across a wide range of data sets. And that's basically what good authors
Huh.
do, the
No
distillation of
way.
what's true across a wide range of data set, you know? And in that sense, it's like very, very true, you know?
Right. Man, and I want to ask you these as someone that, well, you're a father, right? I'm not a father. And I've always wondered what should we look, well, how do I phrase this? Like when a kid sees something, right, in a film, in a movie that impacts them, maybe scares them at time, it creates some type of reaction. I've heard, or I think kind of like the natural approach from a father would be, or a parent in general would be, to tell them like, hey, that's not real, right?
Mhm.
So I don't know, you might have something about this that I don't know, but what do you think of that?
Um, well, the way we deal with it practically, if he's scared of something, is to we're very like oriented toward more. I don't know if this is a real term or a term I just made up, but we're kind of like uh, I think it's respectful parenting. I think is what it's called, and
Okay.
that sounds very like kind of like holier than now, but I think it's a school of thought that it's more like giving kids autonomy and kind of validating their feelings more, and making sure that we know, like, we acknowledge what they're feeling, rather than like kind of like trying to get them not to be scared.
Hmm.
Um, or saying, oh, it's fine. Like it's kind of like meeting them where they are. And so what I do, what we do, my wife and I do with our child is, our son, he's 3, if he's scared of something, and we handle it, my wife and I handle it a bit differently, actually, but we're temperamentally quite different, my wife and I. And so, but the general way we do it is like, if he's scared of something, we'll say, he'll run to us, or show us that he's scared, and we'll say, hey, that is scary, isn't it? You got a little scared there? Okay, we'll hold him, or whatever he needs us to do. And my wife is more inclined to let him stay as long as he wants in her arms, or whatever, and completely, and basically, like, regardless of what situation we're in, if we have to go have somewhere to be, or if we have a meeting or whatever, it's like he's not ready to go, and he needs to feel secure. And I definitely do that. Like, there's I approach it like that to a degree, because he needs to feel secure. He needs to have the sense of security that he has protection. But I tend to do a little sooner than my wife. What I tend to do is try to get him to go back out there, go face the thing again. Like, whether it's maybe like something that happens a lot is, that has been happening recently, is like he's been scared of crowds and crowds of people. And so I'll be like, hey, I know, buddy, it's scary. There's a lot of people there. He's a pandemic baby, like most of his life has been, locked up inside, he was born in February of 2019. So anyway, what was I going to say? Oh yeah. And so I'll try much more quickly than my wife to try to expose him to the thing again, try to get him out there. Even just a little bit, even just a tiny bit, be like, hey, I know that's scary. Like, that sucks. Like, acknowledging the reality and kind of validating the reality of what he's scared about. Cause like, if we're honest with ourselves, a lot of the things that kids are scared about, A, we've been scared about them before, or B, we're still scared about them in some ways. It's just we intellectualize it, or we're more sophisticated about what we're about expressing that fear. Like, he's scared of crowds. A lot of us have social anxiety, and a lot of us are like, don't want to talk with people for one reason or another. So he's not articulating all of that, although he's very articulate for a 3-year-old, but he's not saying like, oh, I'm just afraid that I'm not going to be accepted by everyone, or hey, I don't know these people, or whatever. It's more like, hey, there's something here, I don't know exactly what it is. So I try to basically steel man him. It's like, okay, you're scared of this thing. I get it. Like, that, I see the aspect of it that you're scared about, and I got you. I'm gonna keep you safe, but also get back on the bike. And we've been riding a bike lately too, also, so yes. I'll be like, he'll be like, I fell off, but okay, I got you, buddy. Like, I know that hurt. Here you go. And he'll get back on the bike. And so just repetitions of that really help to give him the confidence that he's that A, he has protection, he has a secure base that he needs, which is his parents. And then B, it's like he has the confidence in himself that he can also face the thing that he's afraid of, and it's real, but he can face the thing that he's afraid of.
Nice, man. Wow. So you mentioned kind of like how both children and adults, we have at the core, there's like the inner child, right? I think Carl Jung talks about that, and it's pretty interesting to see that we respond to things in similar ways, but at its core is similar, and this kind of makes me think a lot about what it means to become an adult, to mature, right? Like, what is it that really changes from childhood to adulthood that philosophically is different? Because and again, Jordan Peterson, I'm mentioning him a lot because I've been reading a lot about him recently, and well, he talks a lot about there's a lot of us that just become old infants, like a 30-year-old, a 40-year-old that still acts like a teenager, and that's very prevalent in culture. not just from the way we act, but also the way we portray ourselves, whether that's the way we dress or the way that we act, being immature as an adult. So I would love to hear from you, like, what is maturity? What is that step from child to adult? What happens there philosophically?
Hmm. Well, I don't know. I think maybe it has to do with, I don't know if I'm fully mature. I think I am, but I don't know. Maybe I'm still in the process of maturing. Obviously, I don't know if it's a binary. I think it may be a continuum. It's like,
Sure.
oh, it's a developmental process. It's not like, oh, I'm now mature.
Right.
It's probably, I think one of the markers is taking on responsibility. Like the more responsibility you take on, the more mature
Yeah.
you are.
Okay.
Because that is kind of the process of growing up, is taking on more responsibility, essentially. Like the first kind of
Yeah.
thing you do is like you have chores at your house, and that's some responsibility, and you're kind of maturing, and maybe that happens around 8, 9, 10, 11. I don't know. That's around when it happened for us. We had little chores that we had to do and help out around the house. And then it's like you grow up, and then you get the chance to maybe get your license, and then now you can
Yeah.
leave the house and on your own. And that's a big deal, because now you have more responsibility. You can't have, my rules, like my parents' rules, like you can have, can't let anybody drive your car. You can only have like one person in the car at a time, this kind of a thing. So there's rules. And so this is, you're accumulating responsibility. And then later on, like you have, you get to move out of your house, and now you have, you move out, maybe you're 20 years old, 25 years old, you move out of your house, and now you have to kind of go grocery shopping by yourself. You have the responsibility to feed yourself. You have the responsibility to go to bed at a reasonable time, wake up for your job, and then you get a job,
Right.
and then so you accumulate responsibility as you age. And I think that is very much correlated with the cultivation of maturity.
Yeah. That's interesting. So you basically kind of, if I understand correctly, is basically about the responsibilities that come upon you, and some of them are some things you seek, and some of them kind of come as you
Yeah.
age, right? Yeah, well, because I've struggled a lot with this recently. I recently turned 26, and I feel like that's a bit of a switch. Maybe not as much as turning 30, but I definitely felt some like wishes to change a bit. I had hair till like super long. I decided to cut it. I did tons of things that kind of made me, or I wanted to feel more adult. Like little things
Yeah.
here and there. I'd love to know, just in your personal experience, like when did you start feeling like an adult?
Well, I thought I was feeling like an adult when I got married. I mean, I thought
Okay.
at every stage, at every level of responsibility and every stage of my life, I felt like I felt like an adult. But not until I moved out of my house, and then I found my then girlfriend, now wife, Vanessa. We moved in together. We got married. Like at all these stages, I felt like I was like, oh man, I'm a grown up now.
Right.
But it was not until I had a kid that I
Really.
realized, oh, that was all just playing. Like I was just playing around. I was playing house with my
Right.
girlfriend and my wife. We were just hanging
Right.
out. But a kid, and actually, I mentioned this earlier in the conversation at the beginning, and I didn't really tie up this thread, but uh, my philosophical and intellectual maturity, I would say, was really sparked by my kid. Also, not just my because I think there's different kinds of maturity, but not just my practical maturity that we've been talking about, but my intellectual maturity, and thinking of the world, and the different problems that we face as humanity, and how to think about those problems, and how to present those problems to a child, and all that stuff. That was, as soon as my wife told me that she was pregnant, I immediately, like, that's what really sparked, like, the 2016 election really got me on the path. But then what really
Okay.
sparked my my philosophical and intellectual inquiry into the nature of reality and the world and how to be and how to live and what's right and what's good, was sparked by my kid. I was like, it's not just for myself anymore. Like I'm not just doing it as an intellectual exercise. I want to get clear on what I think is useful to teach someone else. I'm programming someone else. I'm like the AI programmers who are going to, installing the software that is going to be, uh, dictating the behavior of AI. It's like, it's a lot of power.
Yeah,
Like those are some of the
right.
most powerful, people on the planet right now. And so it's a lot of power as a parent, because you're kind of installing that software. You're at least installing, at least in part, you're installing the software, the beginnings of that software that's going to run and inform their behavior. And so I take that very seriously. And yeah, that's what motivates a lot of my thinking and a lot of my moral inquiry and interest around different political issues and all that stuff. So.
Right. So, well, I'm curious. Like, did having your kid change your philosophy significantly, like your personal individual philosophy?
I don't know if it changed it as much as it kind of helped me understand what I think more, because I've never been like super like set on one way of thinking. I mean, I've gone through stages in different like areas of my life where I've been fairly narrow-minded and ideological. Like when I was younger, like 18, no, it was probably like 20 years old, something like that. I went through like a raw vegan diet
Right.
phase, where I was like very restrictive, and I just was like very dogmatic about what I ate and kind of judgmental, not outwardly, but
Yep.
inwardly about
Okay.
what other people were eating, and but so I can be a little bit intense and have a little bit be a little bit obsessive, I suppose. I can tend toward dogmatism if I leave myself, if left unchecked. And I think that's partly why I developed kind of a framework and a lens through which to view the world that integrates, that at its heart is about balance, and it integrates these different kind of opposing elements, because I think I know it was a protective measure for me, I think subconsciously, because I know myself, and I know that like I have this tendency toward, to be unbalanced and to kind of get narrow-minded. And so anyway, I think that having the kid, it helped me just kind of uncover more of what I thought, and it spurred me to study a broader range of perspectives, because like I think that's useful to, like I've said, like I'm really open to different sources of information, like, and so and different perspectives. Like those are really, really useful, not just intellectually, but practically, like, because reality is really complex and we need different perspectives and strategies to deal with it. And so, yeah, that's having a kid made me realize that on a more visceral level, and pursue things much more seriously, pursue those questions, the big questions of life, much more seriously.
Yeah, I mean that makes total sense, like, and you mentioned again like this idea of like you finding your sources of truth from very different fields of not just study but like perspectives from different lives and different ways to approach life. And like you mentioned woo woo and stuff like that. And I wonder, because I personally struggle a lot, like since I got more in the journey of like philosophy and stoicism and like kind of things that I consider way more rational. How do you deal with contradictions of things that just seem, you were talking about the balance between opposing views, but like, do you find it hard, or is it in your personality to just kind of embrace contradictory ideas and be okay with that, or do you always need to solve it kind of knowing where you lean more towards? How do you deal with that?
Well, it depends on the thing I'm thinking about, I guess. But I think something that I do find something that another trait that I'm proud of is my ability to let go of like information, even if I believed it at one point. If I find that there's some information that contradicts it, that contradicts it, or that is more useful, or it's more true, I'm perfectly willing to let it go. Like I'm really not married to beliefs. There's a saying. I forgot who said it, but I heard it recently. There was like, we question all of our beliefs except the ones we really believe, because those we don't even think to question. So, hey, I may be guilty of that. That may be the case. There may be deep-seated beliefs that I don't question, and certainly there are. I mean, I can't question everything. We need a belief structure, but I do have this trait. I don't know if it's God-given or cultivated, but I'm just interested in what's real and what's true and what's useful. And so yeah, it's, what question am I answering? Oh, you're I think you're asking me what, like, do I always have to integrate?
Yeah. How do you deal with your contradictions? Yeah.
Well, I guess the way I deal with it is first understanding that and knowing that reality is a set of contradictions. Like even at the quantum level, I am like not going to go into quantum mechanics because I am not that smart for sure. But I'm getting this from Ken Wilber. Ken Wilber is a really cool philosopher, really influential philosopher for me. Modern guy, he's getting old, so I hope he sticks around for a little bit longer. But he wrote Theory of Everything, A Brief History of Everything. This other book. He wrote many books, but he's another one of these big thinkers who makes sense of everything. Makes sense of like a large. Well, the Theory of Everything. That's the title of one of his books. So, a large amount of information, trying to distill it. But he has a book called No Boundary, and it is about kind of this duality that exists in these contradictions that exist, and how reality is made up of a set of contradictions, essentially. At the quantum level, a particle is it's a particle, but also a wave at the same time. It's here and also there, here but not here, and so there's these, at the very base level of reality, physical reality, even there's these contradictions. And the same thing happens when you scale that up to the social level, and so anyway, that's kind of something that I've realized, and that I really have integrated deep into my bones, is the idea that reality is made up of a set of contradictions, and that's okay. Like, what is hot? Like, you can't have hot without cold. You genuinely can't define hot without there being something that's cold. But that doesn't mean that it's nonsensical, or that you have to throw out one or the other, or just believe in cold or just believe in hot. Like, both exist. It's a continuum. And so it's actually one thing. It's actually one thing, and we're just using different words to describe it. It's temperature, or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
And so this happens at all levels. And so I just realized that, and then I realized, okay, well, I think that kind of helped me make sense of a lot of things. That's like, well, why do we have the conservatives and liberals? Why do we have the left and right of the political spectrum? And like, why can't we just all be open to change? Or why can't we all just be happy with the way things are? It's like, because the environment is always changing, and we need different solutions for different problems. But even taking the political spectrum, those seem like different things, but it again, it's just a continuum. It's describing kind of one thing, and we just call it different things. It's we make artificial boundaries for convenience sake, but the left and right are both solving the same problems from different perspectives, in a sense. And so that's how I make sense of it. It's more abstract than I suppose is useful, but it's just knowing that reality is a set of contradictions, and then being wise enough, I suppose, and having the intellectual humility is another way of saying it. Having the intellectual humility to um, choose the option that is most practical for the moment, is most useful for the situation that one finds, themselves in.
Awesome, man.
So,
Yeah. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. We're getting close to the time, but I do want to ask you regarding just, well, your book. First, just give me an update of what's the state of it so that I don't, yeah, so that I don't misinterpret the words that
it's changed so much, man. I started
really,
writing several years ago, and like I have the whole how I've conceived the book has changed dramatically. Um, from over the years. Like I wrote this one thing, and then I'm like, I don't really believe that anymore, or that wasn't incomplete, and I was
really.
writing a whole other thing, and I was like,
Okay.
that's okay, but it's good. And so I'm in a place now where I have so much written and so much draft. I think I've been writing a lot for myself to clarify my thoughts, I've been trying to solve too big of a problem,
Right.
which is like making sense of everything. And I think that I need to. So recently, I realized that I need to narrow down the problem, because I'm not a Ken Wilber, I'm not a Jonathan Haidt or a Jordan Peterson. Like I'm very interested in things. I'm very curious, but I know myself, and I need to focus myself a little bit more. So I'm trying to narrow down my focus of the book, and just solve a more precise problem. And I'm still kind of in the process of that, but I have so much written that once I kind of decide on what that is, it's just a matter of kind of rearranging the information and kind of polishing it up. So
Yeah, man, that's crazy because ever since you started talking about your book like years ago, I was like, yeah, this is my new favorite book, and I haven't read it yet. But it just sounds incredible, man. No, I mean, I wanted to ask you. I mean, it definitely sounds like a huge challenge, but well, I know that you were touching very much on the topic of what are certain values or beliefs that unite different religions and philosophies. So I just was curious if you come up with, I mean, I'm not saying just like one thing, but like what are some of the overlaps that you've seen that you think are kind of meaningful to the individual and how to incorporate that into their lives?
that overlap across cultures.
Yeah, yeah, certain beliefs, certain ideas that overlap and are very useful.
Well, I mean, this comes down to kind of the work that Jonathan Haidt has done, with moral foundations theory, and kind of the framework that I've come up with to simplify it for myself. So I'll just speak from well, I'll tell you, Jonathan Haidt says. I mean, Jonathan Haidt has done a lot of research. He's a social psychologist, and he's super. He's awesome. Like I said, he's one of my intellectual heroes. And he is a great thinker, but he um did a lot of research, and took a lot of polls and studies, and it turns out that like we all have about 5 or 6 different moral foundations across cultures that we use to make decisions, and these are actually just like like embedded in our psyche. They're intuitive. So we come to a lot of our like moral decision making, like what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, intuitively. Like a lot of us are like, almost all of us, we're not thinking rationally about what we think is good, and then like like reasoning. We're instead we're intuiting what is good and what's right, and then we're rationalizing it after the fact. And so we kind of trick ourselves, and it's hard to even observe that we're doing this, but most of our moral decision making is done that way. And so, and that's okay, but there are patterns to that, and those patterns are the moral foundations. And what he discovered was that there's one moral foundation is care and harm. These are kind of like the dual, the opposing values of care and harm. Um, which is like when we see someone in suffering, like we automatically want to help, and we want to care for people who are being oppressed and injured, and this comes from our biological, this comes from our being mammals and having to care for young. We have this ingrained in us. Another one is like loyalty and being like loyal to groups. And obviously this has a roots in our tribal nature and all that. So you can think of these as values too: loyalty, betrayal, care and harm. These are two distinct kind of moral foundations or values that exist across culture. And another one would be we got sanctity. Sanctity is this idea that some things are pure, like there's like a higher dimension. Some things are pure, some things are not pure. And of course, this comes from our biological need to avoid contaminated food. And so we're omnivores. And so we've needed to avoid things in our, putting things in our mouth that could make us sick. But we also need to explore new food. And so this is the tension between what's known and what's unknown, in a sense. And so, we got sanctity, we got loyalty, we got care. Liberty is another one, freedom to do what we please and to not be oppressed, and then there is fairness. Fairness is a big one. We all have fairness in some sense. So these are kind of the foundational elements of what makes up a our decision making and what drives our decision making in terms of what's good and what's bad. I think of it in terms of kind of three different strata. You could think of it, three different levels of morality, and they kind of correspond subjectively, roughly to the objective, the subjective, and the intersubjective levels of reality that I was mentioning earlier. But intersubjectively, the things that overlap across cultures are the need for autonomy, like freedom. But then opposed to that is the need for connection with other people, right? And so we want to be free. We want this individual like sovereignty, we want to do what we want, but we also are connected to other people, and our life is not exclusively our own. Like we have responsibilities to others. We have, and Jonathan Haidt would describe that as loyalty, but those are two big ones: autonomy and connection. And then moving down the ladder a bit, you have kind of, in the stratosphere or in the strata of objective reality, you have, this, what I mentioned about sanctity. You have this need for novelty, but you also have this need for security. We want novelty. I touched on this earlier. We want new things. We want adventures. We want to solve problems, but we want challenges. We crave the uncertain, but we also need security. We need predictability. We need habits. We need routines. We need structure. Otherwise, we're lost. And so these are two other opposing elements, but they exist across cultures, and they exist in, these are very deep values. So they have biological origins in our evolutionary history. And then lastly, at the subjective level, you have how do we deal with pain? How do we deal with suffering? And that's, I think the two values there that exist are something like, this is a little more tricky, and I'm still kind of working it out, but it's something like pleasure or enjoyment, because we need that fulfillment. We need that pleasure. We need the happiness. We need that hit, the reward, but we also, and that's contrasted with meaning. That's contrasted with, this need for something deeper, for something spiritual, for something transcendent, it's selflessness selflessness versus, selfishness, in a sense, and not selfishness in a derogatory term, but it's, focusing on the self, focusing on beyond the self, and that's it, man. I think that's the landscape. I think those are the things that are common among everyone. These are values that are, I would say, they're non-negotiable. Like we all have them. It's just a matter of degree. It's not like you don't ever want security. You just have, maybe you're temperamentally oriented toward novelty a little bit more, but you still need a house. You still crave predictability. Like if we were in person right now and I would just like stand up and like push you, you'd be like, what the hell? Like, why are you doing that? Because I'm breaking a social norm and I'm being very unpredictable. And so we don't want that. Nobody wants that. And so anyway, these are all, this is kind of my framework. This is how I conceptualize it. And this is kind of what I was trying to articulate in my book. But it gets very, very dense, and it gets very complicated very quickly. But that's the gist of it. From these 6 kind of value structures, these deep, big value with a capital V's.
Yeah.
All of our behavior flows. All of our decisions are made. All of our intuitions come to us through these. This is just kind of the what I would consider as the rock bottom. So yeah, that's what I would say. Sorry about that. That was my timer.
Don't worry, man. Yeah, we'll wrap it up. But no, man, thank you so much. I mean, that's really cool, and I really hope the book keeps going well. Like I said, it's my favorite book that I haven't read yet, so we're looking forward to.
Oh, that's high praise. Thank you, man. Thank you.
Yeah, man. But no, thank you for making the time. It's been awesome to hear from you. And yeah, well, for my audience, anyone that wants to learn more about what you do, share some of where to find you and what you're currently doing right now.
Yeah, you can find me at thinkgrowprosper.com. That's my website, thinkgrowprosper.com. Also, I'm on Instagram at thinkgrowprosper. I've evolved a lot over the years, from posting inspirational kind of quotes related to success and money and also just mindset, to more philosophical things and then more practical things now. So yeah, it's kind of a little bit all over the place, but yeah, that's where you can find me. And I have a podcast, the Think Grow podcast. I've been on a bit of a hiatus lately, but I'll probably get back into the swing of things here pretty soon. So
awesome. And yeah, well, thanks for making the time. It's been a pleasure.
Dude, thank you so much. It was great.